This Israel report is brought to you by the Blue Agency. Your Israel property is in good hands. Owning properties in Israel can be a great investment, but challenging to manage if you're based abroad. The Blue Agency will manage every aspect of your property, finding and vetting tenants, maintaining your property and getting it rental ready, negotiating contracts and collecting rentals, reporting back to you regularly. The Blue Agency has built a reputation for trust and confidentiality over 20 years. The Blue Agency, your Israel property is in good hands. Contact us at www.theblueagency.com.
The Israel Report for the latest news and insights with Anthony Reich.
Anthony Reich, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. How are you?
Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Yes, it was a busy end to the week last week, of course, with Tisha B'Av being on Thursday, and I haven't spoken to you since then. Thousands and thousands of people gathering at the Kotel at the Western Wall for Tisha B'Av. Lamentations, sitting on the floor, but really towards the end of the day, the late afternoon, the Kotel really filled up. There were literally tens of thousands of people present there. And interestingly, over Tisha B'Av this year, there were more people visiting onto the Temple Mount, Jews visiting onto the Temple Mount, than was ever the case before. Some of the numbers have put it a few thousand people going onto the Temple Mount, and there were scenes showing people who were crossing the Mugrabi Bridge, which is that wooden structure that goes sort of from the Kotel area, from the Western Wall Plaza area, up onto the Temple Mount, with people standing there screaming at worshippers in the Western Wall Plaza area to come up onto the Temple Mount and to go and literally to try to pray on the Temple Mount, which we know is forbidden. And it sort of raised a number of different emotions and questions about our status at the Western Wall and the Temple Mount, and how we should be conducting ourselves. I mean, currently, the Israeli government approach is that the Temple Mount area is ruled by the Waqf, the Muslim Council, and that Jews are allowed onto the Temple Mount, but they're not allowed to pray, and they shouldn't bring any religious artifacts. You shouldn't bring a prayer book, or you shouldn't bring a talit, a prayer shawl, or tefillin phylacteries in order to do anything that might be construed as praying on the Temple Mount. And that's the current Israeli government position. So visit, but don't fan the flames, don't try to incite any potential violence, because that could be quite dangerous. But I think it's interesting for us just to understand a little bit more about that Temple Mount area, and the fact that we have the Dome of the Rock, which is this massive structure with the golden dome and very, very visible from every corner of Jerusalem practically. And then we have on the side very unimposing and quite almost apologetic, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is supposedly really the location of the third holiest site in Islam, whereas, of course, the Temple Mount area for Jews is the holiest site. And there is a certain view that says, well, if that is the holiest site in Judaism, then just own it. Why be apologetic? Why ask for permission? If that is really what you believe, go and do what you need to do. Own that position, own the site, that's yours, take it, do what you wish to do with it. Why would we want to have to tiptoe around? Why would we want to ask permission? Let's just go and do what we need to do. And of course, the question is asked as to whether the Muslims asked permission for their people to go and pray in Mecca, which is the holiest site in Islam. And of course, the answer is no. They just go there in their thousands, however many they wish, and are completely free to do so. So there is definitely a dilemma going on around the issue of the Temple Mount. Of course, the Dome of the Rock was built, just interestingly, in the first Muslim period in Jerusalem towards the end of the 7th century. And it was specifically built there on top of Mount Moriah, literally on the crown of Mount Moriah, rather than where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is today, which is supposedly the third holiest site in Islam, but it was built right on the crown of Mount Moriah in order to compete with Christian and Jewish sites in Jerusalem. That was the Muslims' way of really expressing themselves and almost being out there. I mean, it couldn't be more out there if you tried. I mean, with the Golden Dome and the imposing building. Why was that site chosen rather than the third holiest site in Islam? And of course, therein lies some of the antagonism about the site and the controversy. But it's just interesting that Tisha B'Av really was the moment when a lot of these emotions came out, and people are saying, why do we have to be so apologetic? Why do we have to tiptoe around? Let's just go and do what we want to do. Let's own it. Let's pray there. Let's really worship the site as the holiest site in Judaism. Of course, that's not the way that the police are securing the site these days, and not what they're allowing. But it does put a certain view out there, which I'm sure the listeners will react to, because I think there is a discussion about, do we need to be as apologetic as we are? Do we need to be sensitive to regional sensitivities? Do we have to pander to the intention of the Muslims back in the 7th century to effectively alienate us from that site? And shouldn't we just say, it's ours, let's go and do what we want to do?
Give us your reaction, your thoughts on it. How do you think we should be treating this particular area in 2026? 061 895 1019. Let me have your view on it. So after 13 consecutive nights of attacks on Iranian targets, the US has stopped its attack for the past 3 nights. Now that completely confused me, because I was all ready to go over the weekend, and I thought we'd be back in studio post Shabbat for a special broadcast, but in fact it went quieter, not louder.
Correct. And Howard, I think a lot of people were certainly of the same view as you. I was one of them. I also expected, and still have an expectation, that things are not going to remain this quiet for the foreseeable future. But it did take some of us by surprise, and one wonders what all of this means. So let's just try and put a few pieces into this jigsaw puzzle. So what you're saying is correct, that things have gone quiet over the last 3 nights. We understand that there are discussions going on in the background between the mediators and the US and Iran. There are certain discussions going on. There were newspaper reports suggesting that the US had begun to run low on its stockpile of interceptors, which is a very serious situation, if that's correct. Not only for the US and for the protection of US forces in the Gulf, but indeed for Israel as well, because we know that the US Patriot and the THAAD were used to intercept missiles that were headed towards Israel in past conflicts. And if the US is really running low on the stockpile and having to pick and choose when it launches the interceptors because they're afraid that they might run out, that would not be a great situation. And President Trump has come out denying that that is in fact the situation. But I'm not sure what I want to believe at this stage, whether that's true or not. I would like to think not. I would like to think that the US has sufficient production capabilities in order to maintain whatever they need in terms of weapons and interceptors in particular. But it's difficult to know. I mean, we know that many have been used over the last few years. So it's very difficult to know how accurate that particular statement is. We also know that an oil tanker hit a naval mine in the Straits of Hormuz and apparently exploded yesterday. This was a report that came from an Iranian media report, even though the Iranian government haven't formally acknowledged it or reported it. Neither indeed have any of the other governments, but that would also be a pretty serious situation. When I first saw that report, I was wondering to myself whether that might not ignite another round of hostilities. We also know that an Iranian ship was hit by a Ukrainian drone in the Caspian Sea. And that's an interesting
Yeah, I
development
wanted
because
to ask
Iran
you
is now
about
saying,
that.
Iran is now saying, wow, so Ukraine is getting involved in all of this and we will take action against Ukraine. Let's be quite clear, Iran and Ukraine haven't been friends at all over the last few years. And we know that Iran has been arming Russia with the Shahed drones in their hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of drones have been supplied by Iran to Russia, and Iran has helped Russia even to set up production facilities for these drones in Russia to help it with its war in Ukraine. And we understand from what the Ukrainians were saying that this ship that was crossing the Caspian Sea from Iran towards Russia was carrying military stockpiles, and the Ukrainians have become a lot bolder over the last few months in the attacks that they've been carrying out against Russian targets and targets of ships like this Iranian one, who they consider to be feeding the Russian military campaign against against Ukraine, I'm sorry. So overall, a very eventful weekend, even though the actual direct conflict between Iran and the US took a sort of a back seat and was a little quieter. Prime Minister Netanyahu is due to fly to Washington later today for a meeting with President Trump, which we understand has been set up for tomorrow, hastily, and a short meeting, we understand, but nonetheless, a meeting between the two leaders for tomorrow. There were lots and lots of media reports and rumors about whether this meeting will take place or whether it will not take place, whether Prime Minister Netanyahu even is in a position to be able to fly to the United States, given that there are so many countries that he needs to overfly where this international criminal court ruling applies. And if he were to land in any of those countries, he may risk being arrested under this warrant that has been issued by the International Criminal Court. We know that the UK is now no longer quite as friendly towards Israel under its new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, than they were a week ago or 10 days ago when Sir Keir Starmer was still Prime Minister. So all of that is highly problematic. And of course, when the Prime Minister travels to anywhere, but particularly to the United States, he needs to have a very, very specific plan of where he may be able to land along the way in the event of some emergency arising. And those locations seem to be very few and far between here and the United States. Imagine him in the middle of the Atlantic, and he needs to somehow have an exit point in order to conduct an emergency landing for one reason or another. There aren't too many options around.
No.
And so all of that has led to people thinking, well, this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu is a bit of a ruse. It's not going to happen. It's just in the media in order to try to fool people in terms of what they're expecting. It seems, however, that the Prime Minister will fly today to Washington. He will also attend a memorial service for Senator Lindsey Graham, who died recently, and who was a great friend of Israel's. And the Prime Minister is making a particular point of wanting to attend a memorial service for someone who's such a great friend of Israel. But it will be interesting to see what comes out of the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. We do know that there were these meetings previously when a conflict then happened soon after these direct meetings. So we are just waiting with bated breath to see what happens next. But I don't think that the tension has been taken out of the situation simply because there have been 3 nights without attacks by the United States and by Iran.
It's absolutely incredible to watch. Just finally, we don't have much time, but President Herzog yesterday spoke with the King of Bahrain. What was discussed?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting and important conversation, and I think there's a lot of significance to it. First of all, I think what's most critical about this discussion is that King Hamad actually requested that the details of the call be publicized. That this is not the first call that's taken place between President Herzog and King Hamad. And it's the first time, however, that the king has actually requested that the call be made public. And it sort of ties in with, for me, with what's been going on with Saudi Arabia. where on the one hand, we heard that there was an agreement that the US would allow Saudi Arabia to develop a nuclear program. President Trump came out a day or two later saying, well, the United States will only allow that if Saudi Arabia signs up to the Abraham Accords. There's a condition, a very significant condition, and it has to be peace agreement with Israel. And I just wonder whether King Hamad got the message from that action, and in order to put his lot in with the US and the US military action that's being taken against Iran at the moment, that he feels the need to publicly make his friendship with Israel more visible. We know that Bahrain has signed up to the Abraham Accords. There is a peace agreement. We understand that Bahrain is even quite interested in buying some military equipment from Israel, some missile interceptors and things like that. So Bahrain is obviously nervous about the continued conflict with Iran, and the fact that Bahrain is obviously susceptible and potentially a victim on the part of Bahrain, on the part of Iran attacking them. And his friendship, the Bahraini friendship with Israel, becomes a critical point, not only in terms of protecting Bahrain directly, but also in terms of developing further its relationship with the United States. So President Herzog was delighted to praise the King of Bahrain and to make public the call. I think it's a significant action on all parts.
No question about that. That is where we leave it. Anthony Reich, thank you. As always, we'll catch you tomorrow morning at 7:45.
That Israel Report was brought to you by the Blue Agency. Your Israel property is in good hands. Owning properties in Israel can be a great investment, but challenging to manage if you're based abroad. The Blue Agency will manage every aspect of your property, finding and vetting tenants, maintaining your property and getting it rental ready, negotiating contracts and collecting rentals, reporting back to you regularly. The Blue Agency has built a reputation for trust and confidentiality over 20 years. The Blue Agency, your Israel property is in good hands. Contact us at www.theblueagency.com.